Imagine it's late at night. And for the last few weeks, you've worked on this great, amazing application using most recent technologies and solutions available to you. You know, whatever you wanted, microservices, Java 8, Kotlin. You finished this amazing app and you did it all by yourself. The only things you needed was your laptop, two large monitors, and access to enough pizza, coffee, and cola. Sounds like a nice fairy tale, isn't it? So who lives in that fairy tale? Yeah, nobody. And who works as a part of a team? Yeah, the rest is just hungry and don't have the strength to raise a hand. Okay, so I'm Aga Żaboklicka. You can find me on my blog, Twitter, or LinkedIn. And answering the previous question, I do software development as a part of a team. And today, I'm going to talk to you about a few things you can do as a team member so you don't fail terribly and make people you collaborate with hate you so much that they create one of those little dolls in your likeness that they then burn in effigy. You see, we software developers tend to have some bias towards cutting-edge technologies. It's efficiency-driven, so that's great, but sometimes we tend to forget that the software we do is written first to benefit the human and only second for the computer to understand. So that's why we should care about things we do. And care, I'm going to talk about, stands for communication, assumptions, requirements, and expectations. There are a lot of people inside and outside tech industry who are under the impression that the job of a software developer is just to write code. Well, the truth is we didn't become the programmers because we like working with other people. Well, most of us probably do, but there are still some who are struggling with this part of software engineer job. But you ought to remember that software is created by teams. And if you want to make a difference and be a crucial part of a team, you have to collaborate with others. The simple creation of endless lines of code won't do it. You need to communicate. But how to communicate effectively? Who likes it? Well, there are a few things you can do to become better at the communication. First, who likes the overflowing email or constant phone ringing or people dropping by every few minutes to ask for something? And even though you have to communicate, you still have to get your job done. So remember that you have to take into consideration others people's time. Then there are different ways of the communication. One way isn't necessarily better on the other. The best choice depends pretty much on the context. So remembering that the wrong type of the communication is a big productivity killer. Next time, before you decide to communicate, ask yourself, what do you want to achieve, when, and why? For example, if you need to discuss a solution, try to talk it over face-to-face by phone or Skype call. Don't start never-ending chain of emails. Or if you need to inform about the release, the email is usually enough. You don't have to call the other person just to tell her you kicked off the build. When you communicate with others, remember to be kind, be polite. When it's a written message, check the tone. The sentence length, punctuation, choice of words can easily be misinterpreted without visual or auditory cues. The communication is successful only when the receiver and the sender receive the same information as the result of the communication. So be clear about what you would like the recipient to do next, and make sure the person understands what you need, when, and why. The purpose of the communication is to get your message across to others without any ambiguity, to reach an understanding. When you communicate ineffectively, one email can end up as a 10-email chain plus a meeting with too many participants, or worse, something gets missed, or done incorrectly, and then you end up with the rework land. Communication is tightly coupled with other three, starting with assumptions. Have you heard the catchphrase of Oscar Wilde, never assume, because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me? As per dictionary.com, assume means to take for granted or without a proof. And when you look at those two, you may think that assumptions are something with only pejorative connotations. However, you still make them. Why? Well, in every project, there are things you know and things you don't know. When it comes to the difficulty of the unknowns, the assumptions come to your rescue. Without them, you'd be constantly proving something before you can move on. Assumptions are supposed to describe anticipated events or circumstances during your project life cycle, or things you assume to be true about your application or customer requirements. The problem with assumptions, however, is that even though they are supposed to be true, they don't necessarily end up being true. For example, you are asked to make an estimate or on how long it is going to take to fix the bug. You assume you know where to fix it, so you make a certain estimate, and then estimate even a little bit more, just in case, and then you start to fix the bug. And it turns out there are so many dependencies in the code that you need much more time than you initially predicted. Or you work on the feature with another developer, Joe, and you assume that his part of the functionality will be available to you anytime you need it. But then the time comes and it is not yet delivered. So, as you can see, assumptions can be about anything: people, environment, time, any kind of functionality. But when they end up being false, they can affect your project outcome significantly. So, how to avoid false assumptions? First, you need to be aware that you make one. So try to pause before jumping to the conclusion and ask yourself, how do you know this? How do you know Joe is going to deliver this functionality when you need it? Or how do you know that fixing something this way will do no harm to other parts of the system? Did you check or tested it? Or did you ask Joe when he will deliver the functionality? If you stop and do some fact-checking before deciding that you know something, you avoid the trap of false assumptions and most likely prevent a lot of unnecessary troubles for yourself, the team. And now, when you are aware of the limits of your subjective knowledge, next step is relatively easy. Clarify and communicate. Ask your colleague or teammate about their intentions or about their perception of the situation. And if you must decide based on assumptions, be sure to communicate them to other parties, your team members, colleagues, managers, or customers. From assumptions, we can go back and forth to requirements. This refers usually to customer requirements that are one way or the other communicated to you. Unfortunately, this communication can often result in an error. I mean, have you ever worked on something just to notice for a long time, just to notice in the end that you completely missed the point or did the wrong thing? A requirement describes a need or a want. Their sets are used to capture things needed, information needed to describe things you needed to build, to implement, to test, to design the software. Unfortunately, those requirements are quite often vague, incohesive, incorrect, out of date, and so on and so on. So if you can't answer the basic question, what are you supposed to build, how are you supposed to do that? You see, requirements are one of the most common communication issues between programmers in the business. So whenever you are just about to review or develop it, remember to flesh it out. There are some questions that can help you with it. Ask, when you see the requirement for the first time, check, is it specific? Does it require only one thing? Can it be validated? Does it correctly meet the business goals? Is it consistent with the system? Can it be implemented given system constraint? Can it be tested? Requirements are quite often customer expectations, but those aren't always the same. And not only your customers have expectations, you have one your managers does, and even as a simple developers, you often are supposed to meet those expectations. what's bad, people tend to get frustrated or disappointed when their expectations aren't met. So how to meet those expectations? The key to avoid this kind of situation, the frustration, is first to understand. You need to know what others expect from you. When it comes to for example, when it comes to expecting certain performance and functionality from your product or service, you need to make sure you can deliver what was sold to your customer in an appropriate way and with promised quality. The task or project usually has its own definition of what the success looks like in the end, like Scrum's definition of done, and you need to know this. If you know and define the success, you will meet the expectations. If don't, you'll never meet them even, and much less exceed them. So when you have a full apprehension of what is expected from you, it's much easier to address the matter. Next thing important is to talk with the person having the expectation and describe your progress. Then talk things over and readjust when needed to constantly meet changing the expectations. The last, remember that you can't please everybody, so when you can't meet the expectations, explain why you can't meet them. We use the language of expectations in our everyday software development job, and meeting them is delivering on your promise. It's about delivering to your full potential as a team members. So do your best to understand the expectations and address them, whether you can meet them or not. When we collaborate with others, when you collaborate, you have great opportunities and great challenges. And if you remember about communication, assumptions, requirements, and expectations, you deliver not only a high-quality, well-written code, but also high-quality collaboration. And this way, you take care of a successful outcome of a project you work on. Thank you.